The basement smelled like sawdust and broken dreams. I sat in my worn leather chair, nursing a beer that had gone warm an hour ago, listening to the floorboards creak above me as Sophie paced around our bedroom. She'd been on another one of her yoga retreat planning calls that seemed to happen every Wednesday night around 10:30. Funny thing about yoga retreats, they sure required a lot of whispering and giggling for something supposedly spiritual. My name's Jack Harker, and I've been married to Sophie for 8 years. 8 years of what I thought was a solid marriage in our little Maine town of Millbrook, where everybody knows everybody else's business and secrets have a shelf life shorter than milk left in the sun. I work construction, mostly residential stuff, nothing fancy. Sophie teaches yoga at a studio downtown called Inner Peace, which is ironic considering the chaos she's brought into our lives. The floorboard stopped creaking. I heard the front door open and close. She was finally home from whatever the hell she'd really been doing. I stayed put in my man cave, surrounded by my tools, my workbench, and the mounting evidence that my wife was living a double life. 20 minutes later, she appeared at the top of the basement stairs. "Jack, are you coming to bed?" "In a minute," I called back, not moving from my chair. I heard her sigh, that particular sound she made when she thought I was being difficult. The irony wasn't lost on me. I finished my beer, turned off the lamp, and headed upstairs to what had become the nightly performance of pretending everything was normal. Sophie was already in bed, propped up against the pillows with her phone in her hands. Her blonde hair was perfectly styled, which was odd for someone who'd supposedly been in a business meeting about meditation retreats. She was wearing the new silk pajamas I'd never seen before, the ones that probably cost more than I made in a day. I grabbed a book from my nightstand, some thriller about a guy who discovers his whole life is a lie, which felt appropriate, and settled in beside her. We lay there in silence for about 10 minutes before she finally spoke. "We never talk anymore." I looked up from my book. "We don't." Her voice took on that hurt tone she'd perfected over the years. "Why are you ignoring me?" She paused, and I could feel her staring at me. "And not wanting me?" I put down my book and looked at her for a long moment. 8 years of marriage, and it had come to this. I smiled calmly, the kind of smile that doesn't reach your eyes. "I know what you did, Sophie." Her face changed instantly. The confident, slightly annoyed expression melted away, replaced by something that looked like panic. "What do you mean?" "And I don't want you after your lover." The transformation was remarkable. Her face flushed deep red, the kind of blush that starts at your chest and works its way up your neck until your whole face looks like you've been slapped. She was blushing so hard I thought she might pass out. "I don't have a lover," she stammered, but her voice cracked on the word lover. "Really?" "Yes, really." She was getting defensive now, which was always her go-to move when caught in a lie. I reached over to my nightstand and picked up my phone. I opened the photo gallery and handed it to her, watching her face as she saw the pictures for the first time. There she was, clear as day, sitting in Murphy's Cafe downtown, holding hands with a man I'd never seen before, kissing him, looking at him the way she used to look at me back when she actually loved me. Her face went from red to white in about 3 seconds. "Where did you get these?" "Private investigator." "This isn't..." She started, but I was already scrolling to the next photos. Her entering an apartment building with the same man. The timestamp showed it was 2 weeks ago, on a Wednesday night when she'd told me she was working late at the studio. She stared at the screen in silence, probably trying to figure out how much I knew and how much trouble she was in. "Who is he?" I asked quietly. She didn't answer, so I asked again. "Who is he, Sophie?" "David," she whispered. "From yoga class." "Yoga class." I nodded. "How long?" She was crying now, which might have moved me a month ago. 4 months. 4 months. And you're asking me why I'm ignoring you. "It's over," she said, begging now. "I ended it." "When?" "Last week." "Convenient timing, right when I hired the investigator." She looked surprised. "How did you know?" "You started working out suddenly. New clothes, different perfume. You think I'm stupid?" "I'm sorry, Jack. I'm so sorry." "Sorry doesn't fix this." "What do you want?" "Divorce." "No, please. I already filed the papers yesterday." Her eyes went wide. "You can't do this." "Watch me." "What about our marriage?" "What about it? You destroyed it with David." "It was a mistake." "Yes, your mistake." "I love you, Jack. I'll prove it." "You can't prove what doesn't exist." She was desperate now, reaching for my hand. "I'll do anything." I pulled my hand away. "You should have thought of that 4 months ago." "But you said after my lover." Yes, after means I'm done. I could see the realization hitting her that I was serious. Her face was red again, but this time from embarrassment rather than guilt. Don't leave me, she whispered. You already left me for David. I got up from the bed and walked toward the door. She followed me, still crying, but I was done listening. The conversation was over. Our marriage was over. Everything was over, except the paperwork. The next morning, I was already at the job site when the process server found Sophie at the yoga studio. Mike, my crew foreman, got a kick out of hearing how she'd been served divorce papers in front of all her clients. Word travels fast in a small town, especially when it's juicy gossip about the yoga instructor who got caught cheating. That night, Sophie tried calling me 17 times. I didn't answer. She tried texting, begging me to come home and talk. I stayed at Mike's place instead, drinking beer and planning my next move. Because this wasn't just about divorce papers. This was about respect. This was about 8 years of my life that she'd thrown away for some guy named David from yoga class. This was about making sure everyone in Millbrook knew exactly what kind of person Sophie Harker really was. The war was just beginning. Gary Dunn had been my best friend since we served together in Afghanistan. When I got out of the Army and moved to Maine, Gary followed a year later and started a private investigation business. He specialized in cheating spouses and insurance fraud, the bread and butter of small-town PI work. When I first suspected Sophie was having an affair, Gary was the obvious choice to help me get proof. Now he was sitting across from me at Murphy's Cafe, the same place where Sophie had been photographed with her lover, spreading manila folders across the table like he was dealing cards. You want the full report? Gary asked, adjusting his glasses. He looked more like an accountant than a private investigator, which made him perfect for surveillance work. Everything. David Clark, age 42, manages the tech plant outside town. Divorced 2 years ago, pays alimony to his ex-wife in Portland, lives in that new condo complex on Riverside Drive. You know, the fancy one with the doorman. I knew the place. Overpriced apartments for people who wanted to feel important in a town where the biggest excitement was usually the annual lobster festival. He's got money? More than you, but that's not saying much in this economy. Gary grinned. His BMW is leased, his condo is rented, and his bank account shows he's living paycheck to paycheck just like everyone else. The expensive clothes and fancy dinners are all for show. How long has this been going on? Based on credit card receipts and surveillance, I'd say 4 months, like she told you. But here's the interesting part. Gary pulled out another folder. This isn't his first time with a married woman. I found evidence of at least 2 other affairs in the past year. Bastard. Gets better. Your wife's best friend Cassie has been covering for her, providing alibis, letting Sophie use her apartment for meetings. She's been in on it from the beginning. Cassie North had been Sophie's business partner at the yoga studio for 3 years. I'd always thought she was a gossip and a troublemaker, but I never imagined she'd help destroy my marriage. You got proof? Gary handed me a stack of photos. Cassie and Sophie together outside David's condo. Cassie alone, apparently standing watch while Sophie was inside. Text messages between them discussing how to keep me from finding out. Jesus, Gary, how did you get the text messages? Let's just say your wife isn't very careful with her phone security, and Cassie is even worse. I studied the photos, feeling my anger build with each image. These weren't strangers who'd stumbled into an affair. This was a conspiracy involving people I'd trusted, people I'd considered friends. There's more, Gary said. I planted a listening device in your house. Don't ask me how, and don't tell anyone I did it, but I've got hours of recordings of Sophie and Cassie planning their next moves. He handed me a small digital recorder and a pair of earbuds. Listen to track 7. I plugged in the earbuds and pressed play. Sophie's voice came through clearly, along with Cassie's distinctive laugh. He's getting suspicious, Sophie was saying. Yesterday he asked me why I was working so many late nights. Just stick to the story, Cassie replied. You're planning the retreat, you're meeting with vendors, you're doing extra classes. He's too stupid to figure it out. I don't know. Jack's not as dumb as he looks. Please, the man works with his hands for a living. He's not exactly a criminal mastermind. They both laughed. I wanted to throw the recorder across the cafe. What if he finds out? Sophie asked. Then you divorce him and take half of everything. You'll be fine. But what about David? He says he's not ready for anything serious. David's using you, honey. But at least you're having fun, right? When's the last time Jack made you feel the way David does? I pulled out the earbuds and handed the recorder back to Gary. When was this recorded? 3 days ago, while you were at work. They think I'm stupid. They're about to find out how wrong they are. I leaned back in my chair, processing everything Gary had shown me. Sophie wasn't just having an affair. She was actively planning to destroy me financially and emotionally. Cassie wasn't just a friend covering for her. No, she was a co-conspirator, encouraging Sophie to take me for everything I had. "What's your plan?" Gary asked. "I want to hit them where it hurts most." "Money?" "Reputation. In a town this size, reputation is everything. Sophie's built her whole business on being the sweet, spiritual yoga instructor. Cassie's the same way. They market themselves as these enlightened, trustworthy women who help other women find inner peace." Gary smiled. "And you want to show everyone what they really are?" "Exactly. But I want to do it right. No illegal stuff, nothing that can come back on me. I want this to be public, humiliating, and permanent." "I like the way you think. What do you need from me?" "More evidence. Photos, recordings, documentation. I want enough proof that no one in this town will ever doubt what really happened." "Consider it done." We shook hands, and Gary packed up his folders. As he was leaving, he turned back to me. "Jack, are you sure about this? Once you start down this road, there's no going back. Sophie might try to make a deal, offer to work things out." "She had 4 months to work things out. She chose David instead." "Fair enough, but remember, revenge is a dish best served cold. Good thing I'm a patient man." After Gary left, I sat in the cafe for another hour, watching the people of Millbrook go about their daily lives. Most of them knew Sophie and me as the nice couple who'd been together for 8 years. They saw us at the grocery store, at town events, at Murphy's Cafe on date nights back when we still had date nights. Soon, they'd know the truth. They'd know that Sophie Harker was a cheater and a liar. They'd know that Cassie North was an accomplice who helped destroy marriages. They'd know that David Clark was a predator who targeted married women. But first, I had some preparations to make. I drove to the bank and opened a new account in my name only, transferring half of our joint savings. Perfectly legal, since we were still married. Then I went to see my lawyer and got copies of the divorce papers, along with a detailed explanation of Maine's divorce laws. Finally, I stopped by the job site where my crew was working on a new house. Mike was installing kitchen cabinets with Jess, our only female crew member and the toughest person I'd ever met. "Hey, boss," Mike called out when he saw me. "How's the divorce going?" "It's going to get interesting." Jess looked up from her work. "Need any help? I've got some free time this weekend." "Actually, I might take you up on that." I explained what I had in mind, and both Mike and Jess were eager to help. They'd never liked Sophie much anyway, and they despised people who thought blue-collar workers were stupid. "This is going to be fun," Jess said with a grin. She was right. It was going to be very fun indeed. Sophie's car was a red Honda Civic that she'd bought with money from our joint account without asking me. It wasn't expensive, but she treated it like a luxury vehicle, getting it detailed every month and parking it in the garage to protect it from the elements. She loved that car almost as much as she loved David, which made it the perfect target for my first move. On Thursday morning, while Sophie was teaching her early yoga class, I drove to the studio with Mike and Jess. We parked across the street and waited for the right moment. "You sure about this?" Mike asked, finishing his coffee. "She's about to learn what happens when you mess with the wrong guy." Through the large windows of Inner Peace Studio, I could see Sophie leading a class of about 15 women through various poses. She looked serene and spiritual in her expensive yoga outfit, playing the role of the enlightened instructor who had her life together. "There's Cassie," Jess pointed out, in the back, pretending to adjust someone's pose. Cassie was moving through the class, offering gentle corrections and encouragement. To the students, she probably looked like a caring teacher. To me, she looked like the woman who'd helped my wife destroy our marriage. "Showtime," I said. We crossed the street and walked to Sophie's Honda, which was parked in the small lot behind the studio. I had a spare key, something Sophie had forgotten about when she started her affair. Mike and Jess stood watch while I got in the driver's seat and started the engine. "Where are we taking it?" Jess asked. "Impound lot. I called them this morning and reported it stolen." "But it's not stolen if you're married to her." "Exactly. But by the time she figures that out, she'll be standing in the parking lot with no way to get home." I drove the Honda to Murphy's Impound, where my friend Danny worked as a tow truck driver. Danny owed me a favor from when I'd helped him build a deck last summer, and he was happy to store the car for a few days while the ownership dispute got sorted out. "How long you want me to keep it?" Danny asked. "Until she comes to get it with proper documentation, make sure she brings the title, registration, and proof of insurance. Really make her work for it." "You got it, Jack. This is about the affair, isn't it?" Word was already spreading. In a town like Millbrook, secrets lasted about as long as snow in July. Mike, Jess, and I drove back to the studio just as Sophie's class was ending. We parked across the street again and watched the students file out, looking relaxed and peaceful. Sophie and Cassie stood in the doorway, saying goodbye to each student with hugs and namaste bows. Then Sophie walked to the parking lot and stopped dead in her tracks. Even from across the street, I could see her confusion turn to panic. She walked around the entire lot twice, checking every space, before pulling out her phone and calling someone. Probably me first, then Cassie, then maybe David. Cassie came running out of the studio when she saw Sophie standing alone in the empty parking lot. "What's wrong?" I could see Cassie asking, though I couldn't hear the words. Sophie was gesturing wildly, pointing at the empty space where her car had been. Cassie pulled out her own phone, probably calling the police to report a stolen vehicle. "This is better than cable TV," Mike said, munching on a donut. After about 10 minutes of frantic phone calls, Cassie apparently offered to drive Sophie home. They got into Cassie's white SUV and drove away, leaving Sophie's keys dangling uselessly in her hand. "Phase 1 complete," Jess said. "What's next?" "Bank accounts." We drove to Millbrook Savings and Loan, where Sophie and I had maintained our joint checking and savings accounts for the past 6 years. I'd done my research and knew exactly what I could and couldn't do legally. The bank manager, Mrs. Peterson, had known me since I'd moved to town. She was sympathetic when I explained that I was going through a divorce and needed to protect my assets. "I want to freeze our joint accounts," I said. "Not close them, just freeze them so no one can access the money until the divorce is finalized." "That's within your rights as a joint account holder," Mrs. Peterson confirmed. "But your wife won't be able to access the funds either." "I understand." "Are you sure about this, Jack? It's going to cause problems at home." "There is no home anymore, Mrs. Peterson. My wife's been having an affair for 4 months. Her expression softened. "I'm sorry to hear that. Let me get the paperwork." Within an hour, Sophie's access to our joint accounts was suspended. She could still use her credit cards for a few more days, but any attempt to withdraw cash or write checks would be denied. I drove home and waited. Sophie arrived 20 minutes later in Cassie's SUV. I watched from the kitchen window as they sat in the driveway, probably strategizing about how to handle the car situation. Finally, Sophie got out and walked to the front door. Cassie drove away, but I noticed she parked around the corner, probably waiting to see if she needed to rescue Sophie again. "Jack," Sophie called as she came through the front door. "We need to talk." "About what?" "Someone stole my car." I walked into the living room, where Sophie was standing with her hands on her hips, looking frustrated and angry. "That's terrible," I said. "Did you call the police?" "Of course I called the police. They said they'd investigate, but cars get stolen all the time. They might not find it." "Well, I'm sure your insurance will cover it." "That's not the point, Jack. How am I supposed to get to work? How am I supposed to get around town?" I shrugged. "Ask David. I'm sure he'd be happy to drive you." Her face went pale. "This isn't about David." "Everything's about David now, Sophie. You made sure of that." She tried a different approach, softening her voice. "Jack, I know you're angry, but we can work through this. The affair is over. David and I aren't seeing each other anymore." "Prove it." "How?" "Call him, right now. Tell him you never want to see him again." Sophie hesitated, which told me everything I needed to know. "I don't have his number anymore. I deleted it." "Then how did you end it?" "I told him at the studio." "When?" "Last week." "Which day?" "I don't remember exactly." "You don't remember the day you ended a 4-month affair?" She was getting flustered, caught in her own lies. "It was Wednesday, I think." "Funny. Gary's surveillance photos show you at David's condo on Wednesday night." The color drained from her face completely. "You've been having me followed?" "For 3 weeks. I know about the apartment on Riverside Drive. I know about Cassie covering for you. I know about the text messages where you both called me stupid." Sophie sank onto the couch, finally understanding how much trouble she was in. "Jack, please, let me explain." "I'm listening." "It started out innocent. David was new to the yoga class, and he seemed lonely. We talked after class a few times, just friendly conversation. And then? He asked me to coffee. I thought it was harmless." 4 months ago?" "Yes. But nothing happened at first. We just talked about life, about feeling stuck in routines. He understood things that you didn't." "Like what?" "Like wanting more from life, like feeling trapped in a small town with no opportunities." "So you decided to cheat on me?" "It wasn't supposed to happen. But David made me feel alive again. He made me feel beautiful and interesting and worth something." "And I didn't?" "Not like that. Not anymore." Her honesty was brutal, but at least she was finally telling the truth. "So why didn't you just ask for a divorce 4 months ago?" "Because I wasn't sure what I wanted, and I was scared." "Of what?" "Of being alone, of starting over, of giving up everything we'd built together." So instead, you decided to have your cake and eat it too. I know how it looks. It looks like you're a selfish, lying cheater who got caught. Sophie started crying again. What do you want me to say? Nothing. There's nothing you can say that will fix this. So that's it? 8 years of marriage and you're just throwing it away? I'm not throwing anything away. You already did that. I walked toward the front door, grabbing my keys from the hook. Where are you going? Out. When will you be back? I won't. I'm staying at Mike's until you find somewhere else to live. You can't kick me out of my own house. Watch me. You've got 30 days to find a new place. After that, I'm changing the locks. I left Sophie crying on the couch and drove to Murphy's Cafe for dinner. The place was busier than usual for a Thursday night, and I noticed several people looking at me with expressions ranging from sympathy to curiosity. Mrs. Whitby, our elderly neighbor, approached my table while I was eating. Jack, dear, I heard about Sophie's car being stolen. What a terrible thing. Yes, it's unfortunate. I hope they catch whoever did it. Though between you and me, I've seen some strange cars in your driveway lately. Strange how? Well, there was a silver BMW that showed up several times when you weren't home. I thought maybe Sophie was giving private yoga lessons, but the man who drove it didn't look like the yoga type. Mrs. Whitby was the neighborhood gossip, but she was also observant and surprisingly discreet when it mattered. Did you get a good look at him? Oh, yes. Tall, dark hair, expensive clothes. Very handsome, but something about him seemed off. Too smooth, if you know what I mean. I think I do. Is everything all right, dear? You and Sophie seem distant lately. We're working through some things, Mrs. Whitby. Well, if you need anything, you know where to find me. And Jack, that man with the BMW, he was there yesterday afternoon while you were at work. Yesterday, the day after Sophie claimed she'd ended the affair. I thanked Mrs. Whitby for the information and finished my dinner. Then I drove to Mike's house, where I'd be staying until this whole mess was resolved. But first, I had a phone call to make. Gary, it's Jack. I need you to step up the surveillance. Sophie's still lying to me. What do you need? Everything. I want to know every move she makes, every person she talks to, every lie she tells, and I want it all documented. Consider it done. And Gary, it's time to move to Phase 2. What's Phase 2? Public humiliation. The Millbrook Summer Festival was scheduled for Saturday, just 3 days away. It was the biggest event of the year in our small town, drawing visitors from neighboring communities and featuring local vendors, live music, and enough gossip to fuel conversations until Christmas. This year, it was going to be even more memorable than usual. I spent Friday morning at the construction site trying to focus on work while my crew peppered me with questions about the divorce. Word had spread quickly about Sophie's missing car and our separation, and everyone had opinions about what I should do next. You should take her for everything she's got, Mike said, measuring a piece of lumber. She doesn't have anything, I replied. Everything we own, we bought together. Then take everything you bought together, Jess suggested. Leave her with nothing but her yoga mats. That's not how divorce works in Maine. Maybe not legally, Jess said with a grin, but there are other ways to make someone pay. She was right. Legal revenge was limited and slow. Public revenge was immediate and devastating. Around lunchtime, Gary called with an update. Your wife spent the night at Cassie's apartment, he reported. This morning, they drove to the impound lot to get her car back. How did that go? Not well. Danny made her provide 3 forms of ID, proof of insurance, registration, and a notarized letter from you giving permission to release the vehicle. Which she doesn't have. Exactly. She tried arguing with Danny for about 20 minutes before giving up and leaving with Cassie. What's she doing now? Sitting in Murphy's Cafe with David Clark. They're having what looks like a very intense conversation. My stomach tightened. She's still seeing him? Very much so. And Jack? They're not trying to hide it anymore. They're holding hands right out in the open. Bastard. It gets worse. I managed to get close enough to hear part of their conversation. David's encouraging her to fight the divorce, to hire a lawyer, and go after your assets. Let her try. I don't have any assets worth fighting over. He also suggested she file a restraining order against you, claiming domestic abuse. That stopped me cold. What? He told her to document any threatening behavior, any attempts to control her movements or finances. He's coaching her to build a case against you. I've never laid a hand on her. I know that, and you know that. But in a he-said-she-said situation, the courts tend to believe the woman. I felt my anger building to dangerous levels. It was bad enough that Sophie had cheated on me. Now she was planning to destroy my reputation and possibly have me arrested on false charges. Gary, change of plans. We're not waiting for the festival. What do you have in mind? Meet me at Murphy's Cafe in 20 minutes, and bring your camera. I drove to the cafe and parked across the street, where I had a clear view through the front windows. Sophie and David were sitting at a corner table, leaning close together and speaking in hushed tones. David was wearing an expensive suit that probably cost more than I made in a month, and Sophie was dressed in her best outfit, the one she usually saved for special occasions. Gary arrived a few minutes later and slipped into the passenger seat of my truck. They're still in there, he said, adjusting his telephoto lens, and they're not being subtle about it. Good. I want everyone to see this. See what? Sophie told me the affair was over. She swore she wasn't seeing David anymore. But there they are, holding hands in public, planning their next move against me. Gary started taking pictures through the cafe window. These are going to be crystal clear. No one will be able to deny what they're seeing. How many people do you think are in that cafe right now? Maybe 20, and half of them know you and Sophie personally. Perfect. We sat in the truck for another 10 minutes, watching Sophie and David's intimate conversation. They were completely oblivious to the attention they were attracting from other customers. Mrs. Patterson from the grocery store kept glancing over at them. Jim Morrison from the hardware store was openly staring. The waitress, a young woman named Kelly who'd gone to high school with Sophie, looked shocked and uncomfortable. This is better than I hoped, Gary said, continuing to take photos. By tonight, everyone in town will know that Sophie's affair is still going on, and that she lied to me about ending it. Jack, are you sure you want to do this? Once these photos get out, there's no taking them back. She made her choice. Now she gets to live with the consequences. David suddenly stood up and walked toward the restroom, leaving Sophie alone at the table. This was my chance. Wait here, I told Gary. I got out of the truck and walked into Murphy's Cafe. The bell above the door chimed as I entered, and several customers looked up to see who was coming in. When they saw me, then looked at Sophie, the tension in the room became palpable. Sophie didn't notice me at first. She was checking her phone, probably reading text messages from David or Cassie. I walked directly to her table and sat down in David's chair. Hello, Sophie. She looked up and went pale. Jack, what are you doing here? Having lunch, same as you. This isn't what it looks like. Really, what does it look like? David and I were just talking about the divorce. He's giving me advice? Advice about what? About my legal options. Is David a lawyer? No, but he's been through a divorce before. So he's coaching you on how to screw me over. Sophie glanced around the cafe, noticing for the first time that people were watching us. Can we please not do this here? Why not? You don't seem to have any problem meeting your lover in public. He's not my lover anymore. Then why are you holding hands? We weren't holding hands. I've got photos that say otherwise. Sophie's face went red again, that same deep blush from the night I'd confronted her at home. You're having me followed? I told you that already. Did you think I was joking? David returned from the restroom and stopped short when he saw me sitting at his table. He was tall and handsome, just like Mrs. Whitby had described, with the kind of artificial confidence that comes from having money and thinking you're better than everyone else. You must be Jack, he said, extending his hand. I'm David Clark. I didn't shake his hand. I know who you are. Sophie's told me a lot about you. I'll bet she has. David sat down in the remaining chair, apparently deciding to join our little confrontation. Look, Jack, I know this situation is difficult, but Sophie and I care about each other. We're trying to handle this maturely. Maturely? Yes, like adults. Adults don't sneak around behind their spouse's back for 4 months. The marriage was already over, David said. Sophie was just afraid to admit it. Is that what she told you? It's the truth. I looked at Sophie. Is it? Was our marriage over 4 months ago? Jack, please, answer the question. When you started sleeping with David, did you consider our marriage over? Sophie was crying now, which was drawing even more attention from the other customers. It's complicated. No, it's not. It's actually very simple. You were married to me, and you chose to sleep with him. That's called adultery, not complexity. David leaned forward, trying to look intimidating. You need to stop harassing her. Harassing her? I'm talking to my wife. Your soon-to-be ex-wife. Until the divorce is final, she's still my wife, and you're still the man who broke up my marriage. I didn't break up anything. Sophie came to me because she was unhappy. And you took advantage of that. I gave her what she needed. What she needed was marriage counseling, not another man's bed. David's face was getting red now. You don't know anything about what Sophie needs. I know she needed someone who would encourage her to work on her marriage instead of destroying it. The marriage was already dead. Then why didn't she ask for a divorce before she started screwing you? The cafe had gone completely silent. Every conversation had stopped, and everyone was staring at our table. Sophie was sobbing, David was furious, and I was finally getting the public confrontation I'd wanted. "That's enough," David said, standing up. "Sophie, we're leaving." "No," I said, also standing. "Sophie's not going anywhere with you. You can't tell her what to do. Watch me." For a moment, I thought David might actually take a swing at me. He was bigger than me, but I'd been in the army and worked construction for years. I wasn't worried about a fight, but Sophie intervened before things could escalate further. "Stop it, both of you," she said, standing between us. "I can't take this anymore." She grabbed her purse and ran out of the cafe, leaving David and me staring at each other across the table. "This isn't over," David said. "You're right. It's just getting started." He threw a $20 bill on the table and walked out, probably to chase after Sophie. I sat back down and ordered a cup of coffee, acting like nothing had happened, but I could feel the eyes of every person in the cafe on me, and I could hear the whispered conversations starting up again. Mission accomplished. By evening, the story of the confrontation at Murphy's Cafe had spread throughout Millbrook. Gary's photos of Sophie and David holding hands were circulating on social media, along with eyewitness accounts of their public argument with me. Sophie's reputation as the sweet, spiritual yoga instructor was crumbling, and David's image as a respectable businessman was taking a hit as well. People were starting to see them for what they really were, selfish, dishonest people who had destroyed a marriage for their own gratification. But I wasn't done yet. The festival was tomorrow, and I had something special planned for the main event. Saturday morning arrived with perfect weather for the Millbrook Summer Festival. Clear skies, comfortable temperature, and a light breeze that would keep people comfortable as they wandered through the vendor booths and listened to local bands perform on the main stage. I'd been planning this day for weeks, ever since Gary had first shown me the evidence of Sophie's affair. Everything had been leading to this moment, the public revelation that would ensure everyone in town knew exactly what kind of person my wife really was. The festival was held in Millbrook Park, a large green space in the center of town that bordered the river. By 10 in the morning, hundreds of people had already arrived, setting up blankets for picnics and browsing the craft booths that lined the walking paths. I arrived early with Mike and Jess, ostensibly to help set up the construction workers' booth where we displayed our services and handed out business cards. But really, I was there to execute the final phase of my plan. "You sure about this?" Jess asked as we arranged our display table. She brought this on herself. "I know, but once you do this, there's no going back. Everyone in town is going to know your business." Everyone in town already knows my business. Sophie made sure of that when she started parading around with David in public. Mike was setting up our banner when he spotted Sophie and Cassie arriving near the main entrance. "Incoming," he said quietly. Sophie looked nervous and uncomfortable, which was understandable given how much gossip had been circulating since yesterday's confrontation at the cafe. Cassie was staying close to her, probably providing moral support and damage control. "They're heading for the yoga booth," Jess observed. Inner Peace Studio had a booth near the main stage where Sophie and Cassie promoted their classes and sold yoga accessories. It was prime real estate, visible to everyone who attended the festival, which made it perfect for what I had planned. "Gary's in position?" I asked. Mike nodded toward a nearby tree where Gary was standing with his camera equipment, pretending to take scenic photos of the festival. "He's ready." At 11:30, the festival organizers began the traditional opening ceremony. Mayor Thompson took the stage to welcome everyone and introduce the day's activities. The crowd gathered around the main stage area, including Sophie and Cassie, who were standing near their booth. That's when David Clark arrived. He walked through the crowd like he owned the place, wearing expensive casual clothes and sunglasses that probably cost more than most people's rent. He went straight to Sophie, kissed her on the cheek, and put his arm around her waist. The public display of affection caused an immediate stir among the people who witnessed it. Whispered conversations spread through the crowd like wildfire. Phones came out as people started taking pictures and videos. Sophie looked mortified, but she didn't pull away from David. If anything, she seemed to lean into him, as if she'd decided to stop hiding their relationship. "She's making this too easy," Jess said. "Good. I want everyone to see who she really is." Mayor Thompson finished his opening remarks and handed the microphone to Janet Morrison, who organized the festival's volunteer activities. Janet was supposed to thank all the volunteers and introduce the day's schedule of events. Instead, she cleared her throat and said something that made my heart race with anticipation. "Before we begin today's festivities, I have an announcement to make about one of our local business owners." The crowd quieted down, sensing that something unusual was about to happen. It has come to our attention that Sophie Harker, owner of Inner Peace Yoga Studio, has been conducting an extramarital affair with David Clark while still married to her husband Jack. A gasp went through the crowd. Sophie's face went white, and David looked like he'd been slapped. This behavior is inconsistent with the values our community expects from local business owners, Janet continued. The festival committee has voted to revoke Inner Peace Studio's vendor privileges, effective immediately. 2 festival volunteers approached Sophie and Cassie's booth and began packing up their materials. Sophie stood frozen in shock while Cassie tried to argue with the volunteers. "This is discrimination," Cassie shouted. "You can't kick us out for personal reasons." "Actually, we can," Janet replied from the stage. "The festival is a private event, and we reserve the right to remove any vendor whose conduct reflects poorly on our community." The crowd was buzzing with excitement now. This was the kind of drama that would be talked about for years. But I wasn't done yet. I walked through the crowd toward the stage, and Janet saw me coming. She handed me the microphone without hesitation. Apparently, she'd been expecting this moment. "Thank you, Janet," I said, looking out at the hundreds of faces staring back at me. "I want to address the rumors that have been circulating about my marriage." The crowd fell silent. Even the vendors stopped what they were doing to listen. "My wife, Sophie, has been having an affair with David Clark for 4 months. She lied to me about it. She lied to you about it. And yesterday she lied to everyone at Murphy's Cafe when she claimed the affair was over." I could see Sophie in the crowd, crying and trying to hide behind David. "I've tried to handle this privately, but Sophie and David have made it a public matter by flaunting their relationship all over town, so I'm going to make it even more public." I pulled out my phone and connected it to the festival's sound system. Gary had helped me prepare an audio compilation of Sophie's most damning recorded conversations with Cassie. These are recordings of my wife and her friend Cassie planning how to deceive me and take my money in the divorce. Sophie's voice came through the speakers, clear as day. "He's too stupid to figure it out." Then Cassie's voice. "The man works with his hands for a living. He's not exactly a criminal mastermind." More of Sophie. "I'll divorce him and take half of everything." The crowd was stunned. People were looking at Sophie with expressions of disgust and disappointment. Several women who had been her yoga students were shaking their heads in disbelief. I let the recordings play for about 2 minutes, long enough to establish exactly what kind of people Sophie and Cassie really were. Then I took the microphone back. "I want everyone to know that I'm not the stupid, gullible husband that my wife thought I was. I'm a hard-working man who deserved better than to be betrayed by the woman I loved and trusted." The crowd erupted in applause. People were cheering and calling out words of support. Sophie Harker and David Clark destroyed my marriage for their own selfish gratification. But they didn't destroy me, and they won't destroy anyone else, because now you all know who they really are. I handed the microphone back to Janet and walked off the stage. The crowd parted to let me through, and several people patted me on the back or shook my hand. Behind me, I could hear Sophie sobbing and David trying to get her to leave with him. But the damage was done. Their reputations were ruined, their relationship was exposed, and their standing in the community was destroyed. As I walked back to my truck, Gary fell into step beside me. "That was brutal," he said. "It was necessary." "What's next?" "Now I wait for the divorce to be finalized and get on with my life." "What about Sophie?" I looked back at the festival, where Sophie and David were making their way toward the parking lot while people stared and whispered. Sophie made her choice. Now she gets to live with it. But as I drove away from the festival, I realized that my revenge wasn't quite complete. There was still one more thing I needed to do to ensure that Sophie and David never forgot the consequences of their actions, and it involved the construction site where my crew was working on Monday morning. Monday morning brought news that spread through Millbrook faster than butter on hot toast. David Clark had been fired from his job at the tech plant. Apparently, his boss had been at the festival on Saturday and didn't appreciate having an employee involved in such a public scandal. Sophie had also lost several yoga students, and 2 women had canceled their memberships at Inner Peace Studio. Cassie was trying to do damage control, but the recordings I'd played at the festival had made it clear that she was just as guilty as Sophie. I was at the construction site framing walls for a new house when Gary called with an update. "David's packing up his condo," he reported. "Looks like he's leaving town." "Running away?" "His lease is up at the end of the month anyway, and without a job, he can't afford to stay. Word is he's moving back to Portland to live with his brother." "What about Sophie?" "Still staying at Cassie's apartment. She's been calling you nonstop, but you're not answering. Nothing she can say will change anything. She might try one last desperate move. Desperate people do stupid things." Gary was right to be concerned. I'd humiliated Sophie and David publicly. destroyed their reputations, and effectively driven David out of town. But Sophie was still here, still angry, and still capable of causing trouble. That afternoon, I got my answer about what Sophie's next move would be. I was installing kitchen cabinets when Mike came running over with his phone in his hand. "Boss, you need to see this." He showed me a Facebook post that Sophie had written an hour earlier. It was a long, rambling message about domestic abuse, emotional manipulation, and how I had systematically destroyed her life through psychological torture. According to Sophie's version of events, I was a controlling, abusive husband who had isolated her from friends, monitored her every move, and threatened her when she tried to leave. The affair with David was portrayed as her desperate attempt to escape an abusive marriage. "She's trying to flip the script," Mike said. "Make herself look like the victim." How many people have seen this? It's been shared about 50 times already, and some people are buying it. I read through the comments on Sophie's post. About half of them were supportive, expressing sympathy for her situation and condemning me as an abuser. The other half were skeptical, pointing out that Sophie had been caught cheating and was now trying to justify her actions. "This is bad," Jess said, reading over my shoulder. "If enough people believe this story, it could hurt your business. Who wants to hire a contractor they think beats his wife?" She was right. Sophie's false accusations could destroy my reputation and my livelihood. I needed to respond quickly and decisively. "Gary," I called, "I need you to meet me at the house in an hour and bring every piece of evidence you've collected." "What are you planning?" "The final blow." I drove home to the house I'd shared with Sophie for 8 years, the house that was now empty and quiet without her presence. I walked through the rooms, remembering better times when we'd been happy together, when I'd thought our marriage would last forever, but those days were gone, destroyed by Sophie's selfishness and David's predatory behavior. Gary arrived with a box full of photographs, audio recordings, and documented evidence of Sophie's affair. We spread everything out on the kitchen table, organizing it chronologically to tell the complete story of how my marriage had ended. "What's the plan?" Gary asked. "I'm going to post the truth online, all of it. Every photo, every recording, every piece of evidence that proves Sophie is lying about being abused. That's going nuclear, Jack. Once you put this stuff on the internet, it's there forever." "Good. I want it to be there forever. I want everyone to know exactly what kind of person Sophie Harker really is." I spent the next 2 hours creating a comprehensive blog post that laid out the entire timeline of Sophie's affair. I included photos of her with David, transcripts of her recorded conversations with Cassie, and documentation of every lie she'd told me. The title of the post was simple: "The Truth About Sophie Harker." I explained how I'd discovered the affair, how I'd tried to handle it privately, and how Sophie and David had forced me to make it public by continuing their relationship and lying about it. I addressed Sophie's abuse allegations directly, pointing out that I had never threatened her, never isolated her from friends, and never tried to control her behavior. The only thing I'd controlled was access to our joint bank accounts, which was my legal right as her husband. "She's not a victim of domestic abuse," I wrote. "She's a woman who got caught cheating and is now trying to rewrite history to make herself look sympathetic." I posted the blog entry on every social media platform I could think of, then sent the link to everyone in my phone contacts. Within an hour, it had been shared dozens of times and was spreading throughout the Millbrook community. The response was immediate and overwhelming. People who had initially believed Sophie's abuse story were now seeing the evidence of her affair and changing their minds. Comments poured in expressing support for me and condemnation of Sophie's lies. But the most satisfying response came from an unexpected source: David Clark's ex-wife in Portland. She sent me a private message through Facebook. "Thank you for exposing David for what he really is. He did the same thing to me, had an affair, then tried to make me look like the crazy, controlling wife when I found out. Your evidence proves he's a serial cheater who targets married women." She went on to explain that David had a pattern of pursuing married women, convincing them that their marriages were unhappy, and then abandoning them once the affairs became public. Sophie wasn't his first victim, and she probably wouldn't be his last. "I'm sharing your blog post with my divorce attorney," she wrote. "This evidence might help me get my alimony reduced, since it proves David was cheating during our marriage too." By evening, Sophie's abuse allegations had been thoroughly discredited. Her Facebook post had been deleted, and several people had posted comments calling her out for lying about domestic violence. Cassie had also deactivated her social media accounts, probably to avoid the backlash from her role in helping Sophie cheat. I was sitting on my front porch, enjoying the quiet evening, when a car pulled into my driveway. Sophie got out and walked toward the house, looking defeated and exhausted. "Jack, we need to talk." "No, we don't. Please, just 5 minutes." Against my better judgment, I let her sit on the porch steps. She looked like she'd aged 5 years in the past week. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "I'm sorry about the affair, I'm sorry about the lies, and I'm sorry about the Facebook post." "Okay. I know you'll never forgive me, but I want you to know that I loved you. I still love you." "No, you don't. You love the idea of being married, but you don't love me. If you loved me, you wouldn't have slept with David for 4 months. It was a mistake. It was a choice. You made that choice every day for 4 months." Sophie was crying again, but this time it didn't move me at all. "What happens now?" "Now you sign the divorce papers and move on with your life." "David's leaving town." "I heard." "He said he never loved me. He said I was just a temporary distraction." "I could have told you that." "I threw away 8 years of marriage for a man who didn't even care about me." "Yes, you did." Sophie wiped her eyes and stood up. "I know you hate me, but I hope someday you can remember the good times we had." "I will, but I'll also remember how it ended." She walked back to her car without another word. As she drove away, I felt a sense of closure that I hadn't experienced since this whole nightmare began. The divorce was finalized 3 weeks later. Sophie signed the papers without contest, agreeing to a 50-50 split of our assets and no alimony. She and Cassie closed Inner Peace Studio and left Millbrook together, reportedly moving to Boston where they planned to start over. David Clark never returned to Maine. According to his ex-wife, he'd found a new job in California and was probably already pursuing his next victim. 6 months later, I was working on a new construction project when Mike brought me a copy of the local newspaper. "Check out the wedding announcements," he said with a grin. I flipped to the social section and saw a photo of David Clark in a tuxedo, standing next to a blonde woman in a wedding dress. The caption identified her as his new wife, a divorced mother of 2 from San Francisco. "Think she knows what she's getting into?" Mike asked. "She'll find out eventually. They always do." I folded up the newspaper and got back to work. Sophie and David were someone else's problem now. I had a business to run, a life to rebuild, and a future to look forward to. The affair that had nearly destroyed me had actually made me stronger. I'd learned that I was tougher than I thought, smarter than people gave me credit for, and capable of fighting back when someone tried to take advantage of me. Most importantly, I'd learned that revenge, when served properly, could be more satisfying than forgiveness. Sophie had asked me why I was ignoring her and not wanting her. I'd told her the truth. I knew what she'd done, and I didn't want her after her lover. She'd blushed because she knew she was caught. And in the end, that blush had cost her everything.